Okay, hello, and welcome back to the Broken Business Models podcast. We're your hosts, Ryan and James. And before we get into the podcast, let's just get a quick disclaimer out of the way. Nothing in this video or this podcast or any of our other content should be taken as investing advice. We're going to be talking about a individual stock that either of us could have any position in at any time without notice. We could be buying or selling, shorting, whatever, and without any prior notice. And so just make sure you do your own work, hire an investment professional, and be very careful whenever making your own investment decisions. So with that being said, the stock that we're going to be talking about today is called Archer Aviation. So Archer Aviation went public via a SPAC back in 2021. And what they do is they make these really, really cool looking vehicles called eVTOLs, stands for Electric Vertical Takeoff and Landing. So basically, the idea behind these eVTOLs is that in today's day and age, especially in cities like Los Angeles, Miami, other cities like that, things are getting very crowded, and traditional cars and highways are putting out a lot of pollution, and people, it's not the most attractive way to get around. So they're trying to solve that by making these basically flying cars. So they went public via SPAC in 2021, right at the peak of the bubble, and they raised almost $1 billion. And as you might not be surprised, Cathie Wood was one of the big investors in the early days. Since then, and at the time that they went public, there were a few main bull points that they pushed. The first is that the total addressable market of eVTOLs doesn't really exist right now, but Morgan Stanley predicts that it will become a more than $1 trillion industry by 2040. So $1 trillion market is obviously extremely huge, even though it basically doesn't exist today. But that's what Morgan Stanley thinks. Additionally, since they went public, they have received backing from some big name automakers and aviation companies such as United, Boeing, and Stellantis. And recently, they've also announced a massive contract with the U.S. Air Force. Basically, all these things are saying that all these sophisticated, diligent, and disciplined companies and organizations are being involved with Archer, and that gives them some credibility. So after they went public, the stock didn't really do much for a while, except trudge down gradually lower over the course of 2022 until the first half of 2023 when a few major things happened. So for one, they started getting payments from United for one of their eVTOL vehicles. In fact, they got about $10 million payment from United. Additionally, they announced this massive deal with the U.S. Air Force, and they also got regulatory approval from the FAA to start doing test flights of their vehicles. So all very, very, very encouraging things, especially in the past just couple of months. With all that good news, the stock has basically more than tripled. Cathie Wood has been piling into the stock, and it's been receiving a lot of investor hype. So with that being said, James, I hand it over to you. I've been rambling a little bit. So what are the, what's the flip side of this thesis?
Yeah, so I think you did a great job talking through the bull thesis and why a lot of investors have been excited about Archer Aviation. But recently, on August 15th, a short seller called Grizzly Research released a short report saying, Archer Aviation isn't really all it's hyped up to be. Now, right off the bat, you always have to be very careful with short seller reports. The short sellers who release them, they're obviously short the stock. They are biased because they benefit from the stock price going down. So you have to be extremely careful with what with what you take from that. And the approach that we like to use is whenever there's a short selling report, we look at each of the allegations the short seller makes, And some of them we are able to independently verify based on publicly available information. Now, if we can independently verify, well, then we can take that point as fact. There are other claims that short sellers make that are impossible for us to independently verify. For those ones, we take those with a much larger grain of salt. So Grizzly Research has made a number of allegations, some of which are we can independently verify, some of which we cannot. So we'll go through it point by point, and we'll first talk about the ones that we can verify. So first off is this massive contract that they signed with the U.S. Air Force when they announced that they entered into a contract worth up to $142 million, representing landmark investment into EV technology by the U.S. military. Now, this looks great. This is a huge amount of money and is a huge vote of confidence into Archer. Now, we have to understand exactly what is the nature of this contract. So the U.S. Air Force has this program called AFWERX. And this is a program where they set aside some money where they'll invest in a bunch of innovative new technologies that may have military applications. And they take the approach very much like a venture capital fund. They'll invest in a huge number of speculative early stage technologies and startups, knowing that most of them will probably fail, but these technologies are so revolutionary that if one of them succeeds, that'll be such a huge success as to make up for all of the failures. Now, specifically with Archer, this here is from Archer's press release. They say that the contract is for delivery of up to 6 of Archer's Midnight aircraft to the Air Force, as well as sharing of some data, pilot training, development of maintenance and repair operations. So they say they're going to deliver 6 aircraft to the U.S. Air Force and also do some other ancillary services. Now, if you take the $142 million that they're talking about divided by 6, you get $24 million per aircraft, which is a huge amount of money. Now, Archer has a separate deal to potentially sell aircraft to United Airlines for $5 million each. So why is the Air Force paying 5 times more per aircraft than United is paying? Well, the answer is they're actually not. So here we found a press release from the U.S. Department of Defense, which also talks about this deal. And they say that the deal is indefinite delivery and indefinite quantity. So what that means is that basically the Air Force has set aside $142 million that they can use. They don't have to. There's no obligation. If they want to, they can purchase an indefinite quantity of Archer aircraft over, an indefinite period of time. And they say that they expect this to be completed by July of 2028, they're thinking about many years out in the future. In 2023, they're only giving Archer $1.3 million. And this is for research, development, and testing. So they give Archer, and they will, based on this research and development, they will do a cost-benefit analysis of the Midnight aircraft. So what they're doing is they're giving Archer $1.3 million. They're going to do some research, a cost-benefit analysis, and at some point in the future, they might buy some aircraft from Archer. There is no hard commitment to spend the full $142 million, and the price of it has not yet been set. So for them to come out and say we're going to get up to $142 million, well, it's theoretically possible, but it's far from being a done deal. So this is, and we'll see when we go through the points, a lot of them are like this, where Archer comes out and releases a press release talking about a huge amount of money in a deal that looks really good. But when you look into the fine print, it's a lot more uncertain than Archer makes it out to be. And so the next issue is a long-standing litigation between Archer Aviation and another company called Whisk Aero. So Whisk Aero is another eVTOL maker, and they also are attempting to develop autonomous flight technology. So Whisk was eventually acquired by Boeing, but the litigation started well before that in April of 2021. Whisk sued Archer for what they said was brazen theft of intellectual property and confidential information. So a Whisk employee was poached by Archer, and that employee allegedly downloaded thousands of files from Whisk of confidential information and intellectual property. He took that over to Archer, and Archer used that to develop their own aircraft in what Whisk is alleging is an infringement of their intellectual property rights. So this litigation has been ongoing for 2 years. And then in August of 2023, Archer comes out and says Whisk Aero, Archer, and Boeing reach agreement to settle litigation and enter into autonomous flight collaboration. Additionally, Boeing invests into Archer's latest funding round. So this all sounds great. They were able to amicably settle their litigation. And not only that, but they're going to cooperate with each other. And Boeing is even going to support Archer by investing into Archer. But then you have to look at the fine print. So in conjunction with this press release, Archer also released a Form 8K. And the Form 8K, it's an SEC filing that companies are required to publish whenever they have a material, something material happens. And a lot of retail investors, especially, will only read the press releases. They won't go in and read the 8Ks, which are a lot more technical and difficult to read by nature. And if you look at the fine print in the 8K, the situation is actually not so good as Archer, as you might be led to believe by only reading the press release. So in the 8K, they say the company, Archer, has agreed to issue Whisk a warrant to purchase up to 13 million shares of common stock with an exercise price of 1 cent per share. So they gave Whisk 13 million shares for free. At the current share price, these warrants are worth $85 million, which is greater than the amount of money that Boeing invested into Archer. Additionally, Boeing has rights to receive even more free warrants if they participate in a future funding round with Archer. So basically, Archer had to settle the litigation from Whisk for $85 million, which is a lot of money. But this was paid in stock, not cash. And this is a recurring thing we see, that whenever they have a deal or any situation, they only talk about the good parts of it in the press release. The bad parts are hidden in the 8K, where most investors don't read it. And so next is their deal with United Airlines. So United Airlines agreed to sign a deal with Archer that they could purchase pay $1 billion for 200 of Archer's aircraft, which is $5 million per aircraft. And this has been really one of the a major linchpin of the bull thesis for Archer, is that they have the backing from United Airlines. And once they get FAA approval, they have this massive order backlog already in place. However, we again have to go into the fine print. And this is from Archer's SPAC prospectus. Either party will have the right to terminate the agreements if such party determines, at its discretion, that it is not likely that the material terms will be agreed to in a manner consistent with such party's business, and operational interests, as those interests may change from time to time. What this means is that at any time, United could say, "Oh, our interests have changed, or we've reevaluated it, and we no longer think that purchasing Archer's aircraft is in our best interest." So basically, United can pull out of this deal whenever they want. So this $1 billion deal from United is really just hypothetical. It's something that could happen, but it doesn't have to happen because United can back out. Also, um, because the as part of this deal, Archer issued United warrants to purchase up 14 million shares, which are worth about $100 million at today's share price, but close to $200 million at the time of the SPAC when they signed the deal. So those 14 million shares, United cannot execute those immediately. They are separated into 4 different tranches, and each tranche has a milestone that has to be met before United can execute that and realize the gains from these warrants. The first 2 conditions are just signing the agreement, which they've already done, and executing the SPAC merger, both of which have already been done. So United has already been able to execute the first 2 tranches. The second 2 tranches require Archer to gain FAA certification of the aircraft, which has not yet happened, and for Archer to begin delivering aircraft to United. So neither of the latter 2 conditions has been met. So United has not been able to execute the second half of the warrants. In August of 2022, Archer received a $10 million pre-delivery payment from United. So why did United prepay $10 million to Archer? The aircraft has not yet received FAA approval, and they're not even close to being ready to deliver them. So why make this prepayment? Well, it's because they amended the 3rd milestone. They amended it such that 700,000 700,000 warrants can be vested upon United paying a $10 million prepayment to Archer. And then after that, they have to agree to begin negotiations about the exact terms of delivering the aircraft to United eventually. But again, United is not committing to anything. They're just agreeing to begin negotiations. And they just have to negotiate for a 6-month period. And then they can execute another 2.2 million shares from their warrants. So just by giving this $10 million prepayment, United is able to vest 2.9 million warrants worth about $19 million at today's share price. So they pay $10 million and then they get to cash out $19 million. So when you start seeing, all the fine print and the things going on behind the scenes, this prepayment really isn't a great thing for Archer because it's basically just United trying to cash out quicker. And then finally, they also recently had an agreement with Stellantis, which is a major automobile company. They make Jeep, Dodge, Ram, Fiat, and some other cars. So they entered into they became a strategic investor in Archer. And the idea is eventually, when and if Archer ever receives FAA approval and begins mass production, Stellantis will help in that manufacturing process. And if you read the press release about this strategic investment, it says Stellantis will provide up to $150 million of equity capital for potential draw by Archer at its discretion in 2023 and 2024. So if you read that, it sounds like Stellantis has $150 million that they're willing to give Archer. Archer has the discretion to draw on that money and issue new shares and get this money at any time they want because it's at Archer's discretion, which sounds very good. The problem is it's a little bit more complicated. So that $150 million of financing is contingent on milestones of technical milestones that Archer has to meet, which may or may not, which Archer may or may not even be able to meet. Initially, Stellantis only gave them $25 million. And while they said, oh, it's at our discretion to raise this additional money from Stellantis, well, it's only at their discretion after they achieve milestones, which have not yet been met. So to say that, they have this $150 million they can draw at their discretion is a bit misleading because they haven't met the milestones yet. In addition, just like with United and with Boeing, Stellantis gets 15 million free warrants, which would be worth $100 million at today's market price. And those are, again, based on milestones, so they can't be vested immediately. But we see a recurring pattern where whenever Archer has a customer or a partner, they are giving hundreds of millions of dollars of free warrants to entice these partners to partner with them. And that's never a good sign, because it shows that, if their technology was really so great as they maybe want you to believe, all these big corporations should be coming to Archer and, trying to get involved with Archer. The fact that they have to give such extremely generous free warrants, which are diluting the existing shareholders, they have to give these massive free warrants to entice partners to come, really shows that, they're having a harder time signing these deals than they would maybe like you to think. And this is a common strategy that early stage companies and startups will employ that investors really need to be aware of. So if you're a startup and if you can sign a strategic partnership or some deal with a large established corporation, that gives you the perception of credibility, right? So, if some big corporation that is very sophisticated agrees to partner with you, you would assume that big corporation would do some due diligence, make sure your technology is legit before entering the partnership. But this is not always the case. And if you remember back in 2020, when the hydrogen truck company Nikola went public. So Nikola ended up being exposed as a massive fraud. But before they were exposed, they took a General Motors took a $2 billion stake in Nikola. And if you just read that headline, you might think, well, General Motors, they're smart. They're a big, sophisticated company. The fact that they made this $2 billion investment into Nikola must mean that they've done their due diligence and everything is legit, right? Well, not exactly, because in this case, General Motors didn't have to pay one penny to Nikola. Nikola gave them $2 billion worth of equity for free. All General Motors had to do is agree that if and when Nikola's truck is ready for mass production, General Motors would help them with the manufacturing process. But because General Motors didn't have to put up any money initially, they didn't have any capital at risk. So there was no need for them to do due diligence. So that's why there was no due diligence, and it turned out Nikola was a fraud. And so whenever you have a startup signing some strategic partnership or taking a strategic investment with a big corporation, you have to look at the fine print. And if that big corporation is getting such a sweetheart deal that they don't even have to put up any money up front and they get huge amounts of stock for free, well, in that case, there's no need for them to do any due diligence. And I'm not comparing Archer to Nikola by any means, but the terms of the deals that they're signing with United, for example, are very similar to the terms that Nikola was signing with General Motors. United just signs a non-binding agreement that they can, if they want, can purchase $1 billion worth of aircraft from Archer, and they get a huge amount of free Archer shares in return. So there's very little risk that United is taking on, and they get a huge amount of free stock. So when the deal is so good, you don't really have to do due diligence. So you should be very skeptical of just trusting that a startup is legit because they have some partnership with a bigger company. So everything we've talked about up until this point are things that we have been able to independently verify. Oh, sorry. There's one more thing that we need to talk about. So another allegation from the short report is that Archer Aviation, they have their aircraft and they say they're testing it all the time. They have test flights every day or almost every day. And they have a YouTube channel where they post videos of their aircraft flying, and they post many videos all the time of the aircraft flying. As it turns out, they will take one video of the aircraft flying and then re-edit it and re-upload that exact same video multiple times, potentially giving a false impression that the aircraft is flying more often than it actually is. For example, in October 2022, they released this video which shows the aircraft flying. In July of 2023, they also released a video of the aircraft flying. And if you look closely, it comes from the same video. When you look at the weather, you look at the mountains, where the aircraft is positioned relative to the mountains, even look at the glare from the sun on the aircraft. So this is clearly came from the same video. If you were to fly the aircraft on 2 different days, the chances that the videos would look this similar is like 1 in a million. It just would not happen. So why is Archer re-uploading videos multiple times and giving a false impression that these are different videos? Well, possibly it's because the aircraft is not actually flying as often as they would like you to think. Maybe for mechanical reasons or technical reasons, the aircraft is down, and most of the time it's not in flying condition. Only a very small number of times are they actually able to get it up and flying. When that happens, they take a video and they try to milk it as much as possible by re-uploading it multiple times. And we just have this one example here, but there's multiple examples you can find on their YouTube channel of the same video being cut up and uploaded multiple times over the years. And this is not an isolated incident. So this definitely looks very bad on Archer's part. So everything that we've talked to up until this point are allegations from the short selling report that we have been able to independently verify either through Archer's own public filings or from their own public videos on their YouTube channel. Now we're going to get into a few more allegations from the short seller, which we are not able to independently verify. So, we have to take these with a big grain of salt. So Archer has this big factory that they're planning on making, and they say it'll be ready in the first half of 2024. A big factory where they'll manufacture their aircraft. In July of 2023, Grizzly Research claims that they sent a private investigator to the area and they took this photo. And based on this photo, given how little work has been done on the site, it seems extremely unlikely that they could make this target of starting production at this facility in the first half of 2024. Now, we have no way of independently verifying this. Grizzly says that they sent their private investigator, but because we can't verify that, we can't take this as fact. Another thing is Archer has gained approval to begin test flights in 2023, and they say they plan to get FAA approval for commercial service in 2025. Grizzly reports says that they talked to Grizzly Research says that they talked to former FAA experts who said the best case scenario for Archer is that they would gain approval for commercial operations in 2028, and it could even be longer than that. But these are anonymous FAA experts, and we have no way of independently verifying what they said. So we have to take this with a grain of salt as well. But in conclusion, based on the allegations of the short report and what we were able to independently verify based on publicly available information, this is what we know. We know that Archer gives hundreds of millions of dollars worth of free warrants to its partners and customers to induce them into signing partnerships. We also know that Archer's press releases are misleading because the press releases will just talk about, oh, it's so great. We have this partnership with Stellantis or the U.S. Air Force or whatever. But they don't, in the press release, they don't talk about all the fine print that makes these deals a lot less attractive than you might be led to believe. Thirdly, we know that Archer recycles footage, its flight footage, which makes it hard to believe that they are actually flying as often as they claim. Because if they actually are flying every day, they would have so much footage that they could release a new footage every time. The fact that they're recycling is clearly a cause for concern, and we know that they're recycling. This is easily verifiable by looking at their YouTube videos as displayed here. So that's something that is indisputable. It's also indisputable that the $1 billion of orders from United Airlines are non-binding. They admit as much in their own SPAC prospectus. And finally, the U.S. Air Force orders that $142 million with the U.S. Air Force, it could end up being way less than advertised. And we know that based on the DoD press release, which talks about how they're only paying $1.2 million in the first year, and it is an indefinite quantity and indefinite timeline order. So these are all facts that we know. And based on these, we have serious concerns about Archer Aviation and their ability to, execute on the very lofty promises or projections that they have given to investors.
So if all this is the case, and there's all this these negative aspects out in the open now, courtesy of Grizzly, why is the stock still tripled in the past few weeks? And Cathie Wood buying up even more shares than she already owns?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, I think Grizzly Research is it's not that famous. It's not the best known short seller. So it's possible that a lot of Archer shareholders just don't know about the short report and have not read it. Another thing is, even if you know that there's all these issues with the partnerships and all these issues with recycling footage and whatnot, if you really believe in Archer's technology and you really believe that they can make an eVTOL, and eVTOL is going to be this massive $1 trillion market, you might still think it's a long regardless. Now, if you watched our video we posted on our main channel, Wall Street Millennial, about a week ago about the economic infeasibility of eVTOLs in general, that alone would probably disqualify making an investment into Archer. But I mean, there are obviously people who have different opinions who think that eVTOLs will be the next big thing, and they're willing to overlook a lot of these red flags and continue investing in Archer.
All right. I think if nothing else, we can wrap it up.
Yeah, well, I think that wraps it up. If any of you have any other thoughts about Archer Aviation, any other factors you think that we missed that are important, please let us know in the comments section below. And we will see you on the next one.